What's up, everybody? Just a lazy, boring Tuesday afternoon in the NFL. Antwan Staley probably just rolling out of bed, hasn't done much this morning. It's a ho-hum kind of day, right, Antwan?
Yeah, just a little bit. I went to go. Thought it was gonna be a relaxed day. I was gonna play a little video games or whatever, just kind of relax. And then all of a sudden, oh wow, just shocking news.
Yes, Robert Saleh has been fired after 5 games. If you haven't heard the news quite yet, this is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast. We had to push things back about 2 hours because Antwan had a lot of work to do in a very, very short amount of time. As always, Shout is brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. Get game day ready with Tops. Score big savings, winning recipes, and everything you need for the ultimate game day experience. Head to the Tops Red Zone in store for all your game day essentials and more. And the best place to start, Antwan, is just level of surprise. You're on the ground. You've covered this team throughout the entirety of, I think, Salah's time there, if not all of Salah's time there, definitely since Aaron Rodgers has been there. How much surprise is there that they pull the cord on this thing with Salah 5 games into the season?
Well, I came in 22, but he was going into his second year
Okay.
Salah. So, like, basically, I have covered just about the whole regime there. And yesterday, I wrote an article saying that I didn't think it benefited the Jets to fire Robert Saleh during the season. I figured just let it play out, see how it goes. If you're going to be rebuilding anyway, if things don't work out, and then the next day they end up coming out with this article. So needless to say, I was pretty surprised when it happened. I know the Jets have gotten off to a disappointing 2-3 start. I know the offense has been continued to be stagnant and have the same issues that they did under Zach Wilson, since when he was drafted. But I thought that they would give it time just simply because of Aaron and the chemistry with the receivers trying to get that down and the offensive line. And it just never worked. And, I think they just kept bumping their heads, having the same issues, Salah in particular, and the Jets having the same issues that they've dealt with the last 3 or 4 years. So I think Woody just got tired of it. Woody Johnson, the owner, he kind of put him and Joe Douglas on notice last year at NFL Honors, basically saying that, the offense needs to be better. Obviously, it has not been better throughout the 5 games, and I think now they want to do something before the season gets away from them. Because, quite frankly, if the Jets don't make the playoffs, there's going to be more changes coming, including probably Joe Douglas. This is his last year of his contract, and I expect they're probably going to rebuild, sort of like New England does, if things don't continue to go the way that they are.
It's such an unbelievable story arc because you have Aaron Rodgers thrown into this thing a little over a year ago. And, you have the Hard Knocks play out, and you're around the building. You could speak to Robert Saleh as a head coach of the Jets better than I can. I'm just kind of watching from the outside. But my perception watching that show was this is not a guy as great of a football coach as he is, and honestly, as great of a guy as he seems. Like watching him interact with people, like he seems like a nice guy. He seems like somebody you want to go have a beer with. The problem is, it doesn't seem like he handles all of the flying bullets that happen for an NFL head coach, a CEO of a team, if you
Right.
will. At every step of this process, it's just looked sloppy. It's looked with his commentary, the Hassan Reddick situation, some of the things he said about Aaron Rodgers. It's like, I think this is an organizational failure that stems back to even last offseason. I think you saw enough in year one of Rodgers and Salah to maybe make this change last year. And I think it's probably too late.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wrote an article last year, a column saying that I think they need to consider making a coaching change after last year. I mean, I know they got a mulligan because of Aaron got injury and things like that too. But the fact of the matter is they failed to address the quarterback situation. They knew they had Zach Wilson there, and the year before they were 7-10. They were 7-4 at one point in time. They ended up losing 6 straight to end the year to miss the playoffs. You know how Zach Wilson is. You know if he's going to start games, like he does not give you the best chance to win. Why not go out and get a quality backup that's going to establish that? So that was one black mark. Another one is this team continues to be undisciplined. They led the league in penalties last year in 23. They had 15 penalties against the Broncos. 13 were accepted. And again, like that's not necessarily Aaron Rodgers' problem. Like that's more of a discipline type of problem. I like Salah. I think he's a really nice guy. Maybe not a head coach material. I mean, he had a lot of momentum when he came from the 49ers there. A lot of people thought he was one of the best coaching hires like in that whole coaching cycle in 21. Basically, you look at that cycle, which was, I think it was like 8 coaches, only 2 remain right now. And Nick Sirianni is one of those with the Eagles, basically.
Mm.
And Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell was the other one. All the other guys have been fired, including Salah. So, yeah, I think he's a nice guy, quality guy. And I think, what came to the surface, I think started to bubble up is when, I don't know if you saw this, but Quincy Williams, after the game on Sunday, had some comments basically saying that organization needs to be held accountable. They need to start holding guys accountable. That falls under Salah too. So after
Wow.
that point, I was like, yeah, this thing is going to spiral out of control if they don't start winning games. And I think you kind of saw the seeds being planted, what Quincy had to say, because if he said it, other people will probably feel the same way in that locker room, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where they've been a top 5 unit the last few years, and the offense is not holding up their end of the bargain.
Shout out to Mattis, one of our regulars in the YouTube comments. Will the Salah firing help push Sean McDermott out the door? And listen, I get I love your perspective on this in a moment, but I get the frustration with Sean McDermott on the heels of that Texans game. It's kind of like another one in a string of games over the course of his 8 seasons, 7+ seasons, where you're just like, is this the guy that gets you over the top? I get all that. I don't think the Bills are making a change in season this year. I also don't know if that would necessarily benefit. I don't think there's anybody on staff that I'd be eager to promote into that spot.
Right.
We can get into that on the Jet side in a bit. But the other piece of this too is like, I think sometimes people downplay the success that McDermott has had, like from a regular season perspective. I know it hasn't always been great in the playoffs, and some of the losses are some of the most head scratching losses, 13 seconds obviously being the one that everybody references, and rightfully so. But I always push back that, like, you got to get the next hire absolutely 100% right if you're going to make a move. Otherwise, what you're potentially giving up is a yearly ticket to the playoffs. Going back to 17, the only year that Sean McDermott hasn't made the playoffs was the year they drafted Allen. He kind of had to take some of his bumps and bruises.
Right.
I get the frustration, but I'm still not there, even on the heels of the Texans game. I think that was more a product, and you could put it on McDermott. I did put it on McDermott after the game. I gave him a little bit of credit for owning it. But I think part of it is like these very young coordinators kind of living and learning a little bit, letting the leash go if you're Sean McDermott, but then having to reel it back in at times and have some of these teachable moments.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to learn on the job. I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean, obviously, he's a veteran at this point. I've been, coaching, well, not coaching, but I've been overseeing McDermott like during his coaching tenure since 17 when they, broke the drought against, the Miami Dolphins in the locker room New Year's Eve when there was a big celebration there. Yeah, if you fire a guy like that, yeah, you better make sure you get it right, because otherwise, like you said, like you're putting in jeopardy, winning division titles, setting your team back, and then alienating some of the players on your team. Look, I mean, all coaches are going to make mistakes. I mean, it is what it is. But McDermott is, I still think, one of the best coaches in the AFC there, despite some of his, coaching blunders there. And I also think that, he gives the Bills the best chance to win. I just don't think their roster is where it needs to be from a construction standpoint around Josh. Like, they don't have a go-to wide receivers. They use a lot of tight ends. And, now they're kind of relying on running the ball with James Cook. I mean, you can, attest to this too. And then their defense has been, riddled with injuries. And of course you're going to take a little bit of a step back, but you still have the best quarterback in the division, and arguably, after Mahomes, the best quarterback in football in Josh Allen. You still have one of the best coaches in McDermott. I think they're going to be fine. I think this is a potential get right game against the Jets, who is going through a lot of disarray at the moment there and still trying to find themselves. But you lose 2 games, it's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be a roller coaster throughout the course of the season. I just think that people just need to take a step back there and just relax. If they end up losing 3 straight, then yeah, I think now you can potentially have a conversation. Still not about McDermott being fired, but maybe making some changes there. But I think they're fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and listen, I'm willing to sit here and talk about the long-term viability of Sean McDermott as the Bills head coach. I think that there has been enough blunders, to your point, that it's worth having the conversation. And of course, if Josh Allen isn't here, it's probably not nearly as successful as one of the comments in here kind of pops up. But I do think that there is an element to the fact that you have a chance to win, to your point, when you have an elite quarterback in Josh Allen, and you have always the chance at a very competitive defense. And I think that what we've seen, the way that they've weathered the storm, there's no real way they should have only allowed 23 points in that game with Taron Johnson out, Matt Milano out, Ed Oliver out, Von Miller out, Taylor Rapp out. You tell me going into that game that they're going to only give up 23 points. And I think if you're a Bills fan, you're like, they're probably going to win that game. Let's put some of the blame. I know that Sean McDermott ultimately is responsible for that last sequence, but let's also put some of the blame at Josh Allen's feet, at the construction of this roster as well. I think it's worthwhile to criticize Sean, but I also think that you have to take all of it into account. Josh Allen played about as bad of a football game as I've seen him play since 2019. Is it coincidence that it was on the same day that he's going up against Stephon Diggs and we all saw that post-game exchange and maybe he was putting a little bit too much pressure on himself? I don't know the details to the degree that we probably need to know him to speak on it, but there's something to it. There's something to the way that he left. There's something to the way that that relationship deteriorated. And man, it's just, you need better from your quarterback in that spot. If you're going to go into this, everybody eats. You can't have as many plays as there were where there were throws off target. There were guys that were open when he went in a different direction. Now, could the wide receiving group catch the ball at times? Sure. I don't care what anybody says. That Matt Collins deep shot, Matt Collins has to catch that ball. The top third of the league at wide receiver catches that ball. You need better play across the board, but let's not just sit here and say all of these losses are on Sean McDermott. 13 seconds definitively on Sean. They should have won yesterday, but there was a lot of bad in that game.
Yeah, what about the players? What about holding the players accountable too? I mean, they didn't play well either. You talked about Josh Allen, but the players have to hold some accountability too. I mean, it isn't fair to put everything on the coaches. I mean, they take all the bullets for the players and the general manager and everybody like that. But the players have to ultimately go out there and execute too. And obviously, the Bills have not done that in the last 2 weeks. I still think they're fine. I mean, you look at I think they're the most stable team in the division, to be honest with you. I mean, the Dolphins, they're dealing with the Tua injury there. The offense, like, kind of in the same boat as the Jets, too. Really not very good. The Patriots are rebuilding. And then now we know what the Jets are doing now with, the change of head coaching, too. So I think the Bills are fine. And the question you just have to ask is are the Bills good enough to win a Super Bowl? At the moment, they're not. But then they don't need to be, right? And we're going into week 6. They need to be going into week 17, 18 playoffs. That's when you need to, hit those cylinders and get the ground running.
So we got a super chat here from my good buddy and insider, Mark Bouchard. How does the Robert Saleh firing affect the dynamic with Aaron Rodgers? So now it's Jeff Ulrich who's kind of stepping up to become the head coach, the defensive coordinator. A lot of people probably thought that Nate Hackett, Bills fans know him very well, should have probably be considered to be relieved of his duties, but he is still there. Yes. Obviously very close with Aaron Rodgers. What's the dynamic now within the building? I think it was Ryan Fitzpatrick that says, is this the first ever instance in the NFL where we have a player coach situation?
He did. I mean, I think it's going to be about the same. I mean, you got Ulbrich and he runs the defense there. It'd be interesting to see if he still calls defensive plays or take more of a CEO role. But still some big questions on the offense. I think the offense in particular has been very vanilla, been very basic concepts, whether you talk about 80s and 90s NFL, where it's not a lot of motion there. Aaron doesn't necessarily like that too. And it's been very vanilla play calling as far as the run blocking and, the protection and also just what they do from a, scheme schematic standpoint there. They haven't been able to run the ball, which is very puzzling, especially when you have Breece Hall there, who I think a lot of people expected him to take a next step up and, you end up drafting Braylon Allen in the 4th round. It's going to be interesting to see how this thing changes. But for what I understand, Nathaniel Hackett is still going to be the offensive coordinator, which still going to bring a lot of questions there because he's been part of the problem, to be quite honest with you. Like, and until that gets solved, until they start playing on better offensive football, then I think the Jets are going to continue to be a mediocre team with a great defense there and then very, up and down play calling on the offensive side of the ball.
All right, let's fast forward 6 days. It's Monday Night Football, the same building where Aaron Rodgers went down for the year last season, which was super disappointing. I don't want to bring up that mojo because I do think Aaron Rodgers is good for the league. The conversation, at least, I know he's got some, polarizing views. And when he shows up on the Pat McAfee show, I think that's always interesting. But either way, that aside, he's one of the all-time best quarterbacks to ever play the game. And so I think it's still interesting to watch his arc on the field. So I watched most of the Vikings game, and I did it in a different way. I watched the entire broadcast as opposed to just the condensed one that I usually do preparing for teams, because I wanted to hear the announcers. I wanted to hear the vibes. I wanted to like see the interactions. To me, right now, my biggest analysis of the Jets offense is that Aaron Rodgers, doesn't have the ability, the mobility, I should say, to play the position like he's always played it. He's doesn't have a very great offensive line in front of him, which I think we all knew was going to be the case. And if a team is able to generate any kind of consistent pressure, hit him, it changes the course of the game. I don't want to sit here and say that him and Garrett Wilson don't have a great connection, but you think about some of the great connections he's had with guys in the past. It doesn't seem like it's ever yet to this point gotten to there with Garrett Wilson. So when you analyze this offense and the biggest problems that they're facing, you mentioned they're not being able to run the ball. What do you think is the biggest issue?
Whew. Uh, how much time we got? Base. I think to protect him because I think when they traded for Aaron Rodgers, they thought they were getting the MVP type of Aaron Rodgers, and then we'll never know like if he can be that guy. I don't think because I think the Achilles injury, might have robbed him of his athleticism. When I saw him in San Francisco, I was like, yeah, this ain't the same guy. Like he can't move the way that he used to. Now, granted, does that mean he can't still help a team get to the playoffs? Sure, he can, but you're gonna have to help him at this point. He can't put the team on his back anymore. I think that's a fair assessment there. He doesn't have like you said the mobility. Teams are just the Broncos and Vikings just blitz the heck out of him, and then they know he can't move the way he used to. And then it was a play in particular where during that game where I saw Aaron being blitzed, and then normally like he can still get the ball downfield, sling it when he was in Green Bay. He's not able to do that anymore. I think just protecting him, I think is the biggest issue, and then trying to keep him healthy. He has a bit of a knee injury there, and also in addition to that, a low ankle sprain too. So that could be problematic. But also running the ball, as I alluded to, helping him because you can't rely on him throwing the ball 50 plus times. Like any quarterback in the league, I think if you're going to throw the ball 50 times, I think you're going to be in big trouble there. So I think protection, obviously Aaron not being the same, the inability to run the ball, as you alluded to, Garrett Wilson. I think a lot of people thought he would be kind of like Devontae Adams. He's not Devontae Adams, which is fine. I think he's a very good receiver. Devontae is like a different type of world, which is why I think the Jets are interested in including other teams like the Bills, I think are also interested too. But it's a lot of problems with this team. I think play calling is probably the number one problem with this team, in addition to Aaron, continue his decline as well. Because I think it's evident that he's just not the same guy anymore. But, if you are going to try to reach the playoffs there, you got to be able to help him as much as possible by catching, passes that might not be on the mark, also running the football and just keeping him clean throughout the course of the game, something the Jets have not been able to do on a consistent basis.
It's so interesting because you mentioned what the biggest thing ailing the Jets right now being the play calling. I think you can make an argument over the last two games against Baltimore and then again this last week against the Texans. Joe Brady's play calling has left a lot to be desired. And I think that he feels that. I think he knows that. I think he knows he's got to do a better job of getting guys in a position to make plays. We got a guy in Dawson Knox here who is making he's on the books for AAV 12.5 million per season. I think his cap hit this year comes in around 8 million, which is 7th on the team, more than any other offensive weapon that's on the roster right now. He's got 5 targets, he's got 3 catches. He's a completely forgotten player in the Bills offense. And part of the problem is like you got to scheme things up to get the ball in his hands. You got to create easy buttons for Josh Allen. And right now, the feel that I have, and I haven't even finished my entire rewatch of the Bills game against the Texans yet, is that everything seems to be overly complicated. And sometimes I think you just have to simplify it in a way of like, okay, player A, get open. And that's another big problem for the Bills right now. Not a lot of people are getting open. And when you're open, Josh Allen, you got to find him. You got to put the ball on him. You got to give him a chance to make a play, after the catch. We saw that with the Keon Coleman touchdown. That hasn't happened with Dawson Knox at all. It feels like Dalton Kincaid has the world on his shoulders right now. We saw the drop last game. They haven't been able to really prioritize, getting him involved, or maybe teams are doing so much to take him away, they haven't been able to get him involved. But I feel like the Jets defense being next up, I don't think this is a get right moment for this offense. If anything, Josh Allen's always struggled against this defense. Their coverage players, their ability to get pressure, it's still working on the defensive side, right?
Yeah, they did. He struggled until the last meeting that they faced in November when they blew the doors off the Jets too, and
Yeah.
that's when Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator that week. When I thought going into the game, the Bills will put more emphasis on running the football, and that's exactly what they did. There's one weakness with this Jets team: they cannot stop the run, which I think that's probably what's. If you're Joe Brady, you're thinking, okay, a lot of heavy James Cook, a lot of Josh Allen moving, who is his mobility to make some plays there. You can attest to this. Like, I'll ask you this. I thought going into the year, like, they would use a lot of 12 personnel, especially with Knox and Kincaid, especially considering that was their strong. So you got two really good tight ends. Why not? Why haven't they been doing that? Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
I put out a tweet, I think yesterday. The Bills drafted Dalton Kincaid knowing they had to become a 12 team. And no matter what they've tried for half a season with Ken Dorsey and now approaching a full season with Joe Brady, it's like this thing that you have to be. But for whatever reason, you have this something holding you back from really being it. And it's kind of a crazy thing. And I don't know how much of that is about you're trying not to put Dalton Kincaid in a spot where he's got a block. We've seen a couple of highlights that have been making their way the last couple of weeks where he's been absolutely blown up in the screen game. He's not a good blocker. So I think when you go 12, like if you think about the Ravens, if you think about the Kansas City Chiefs, both those teams run a lot of 13. All of their tight ends can block. It doesn't matter if it's Likely, Kohler, Andrews, Kelsey, Gray, Watson. It doesn't matter. They can all block if they're out on the field. And that's the thing that I think is holding back Kincaid. So I think when you have the two options out there, they haven't figured out a way to pass out of 12 and be successful consistently. That's something that I think is on Joe Brady to figure out.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, that would just enter my mind. I was like, okay, they're going to be more personnel, 12 personnel heavy. Or in that case, if, obviously Kincaid did have some issues with blocking, especially Utah, put him on the slot and then have, Knox in the, traditional tight end role there. He can be your blocker, and then just have Kincaid in a role that he's more comfortable in there. So, yeah, you got to figure it out there because two of your explosive players, offensively, pass catchers, are tight ends. You got to get them involved. Otherwise, then this whole thing does not work, which I think they also need to be in, the market for a receiver, Amari Cooper, whoever you want to talk about. But, they gotta get those, you got to get Knox involved. Like, that just blows my mind that they're not getting him involved the way that I anticipated.
Real quickly, the Shout text line, you could join today, 716-528-6727. You get a free 2-week trial. Then it's $3.99 a month after that. And the Shout text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Byer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give him a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. All right. I've been very critical of Mr. Sauce Gardner and his penchant for holding and grabbing. And it's funny because you see it happen and he gets flagged and you got to see this response from him. Like, what's going on here? Like, why is there laundry on the field? Like, the dude, it seems like he grabs a lot. Like, I mean, both of those guys, Reed is very grabby as well. Am I off the mark there as someone who sees it every single week? They're obviously elite players, but I think that does help a little bit in why that they're so good. And maybe some of that goes uncalled.
Yeah, it did until the Vikings game where it got called a lot. It got called a lot, and then they're frustrated, which, again, that's on the coach. He should have said, you know what? They're calling it tight. You can't touch them. Just don't touch them then. Like, you're going to have to adjust your game. And they didn't do that. And that's why, I feel like, Darnold was just throwing up passes to Justin Jefferson, hoping that, Sauce Gardner's going to be a grabber. DJ Reed's going to be a grabber. Just throw it up there and then hope you get a pass interference call. And I think, you kind of did that too as well. I think DJ Reed is playing at a moment. I don't think Sauce is playing as good as he's played the last couple of years. I think, part of that is I think teams are finding different ways to attack him. They're also using, attacking the Jets defense in the middle of the field with their safeties and just kind of getting him off, edge there. But I think DJ Reed for the most part is playing at a high level this year. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how both of those guys play against the Bills on Monday night. But I think if you're going to attack the Jets defense, it's definitely with the safeties, with the tight ends, with Kincaid and also Knox too as well, because their safety group isn't nearly as strong as obviously the cornerback room is. And also Michael Carter is also suffering a injury too. He had a hamstring injury that he only played one play in the game against the Vikings too. So he's had some injuries dating back to training camp there. I don't know if he's going to play, against the Bills there. And also they could be without CJ Mosley, who's been dealing with a nagging toe injury. So 2 losses there could hamper the Jets defense against the Bills.
Yeah, I mean, the Bills are hoping to get healthier. I mean, they're gonna try to get Ed Oliver back for this game. He's dealing with the hamstring. You got the ankle injury for Khalil Shakir, and that's another piece that maybe I didn't spend enough time talking about after the game. Khalil Shakir being out of this game last week completely changed the complexion of this offense. The Bills already have limited their options at the receiver position because they only rostered 5. They've put a heavy amount of workload on Mac Hollins as a guy that's a journeyman. I don't think he's ever been in a situation like this where at times he's like the focal point of the offense. To me, that's been the biggest misstep of this whole thing. I don't mind reshaping who you want to be as an offense. And obviously you had to replace the Gabe role, right? Like somebody that could come in and block on the outside. And Mac is really good at that.
Yeah.
But when he's out there, it's a liability in the passing game when you need somebody to go to in that role. And it's been kind of mitigated to a degree with Khalil Shakir, but without him last game, it was just absolutely devastating. And he heard it early in the Baltimore game. I think it affected the Bills offense early in that game too. He's their definitive wide receiver 1. And if he can't go against the Jets, that's a huge problem.
And he can stretch the field. That's the thing. Without him, who's going to stretch the defense? They're going to do a lot of dink and dunk there and immediate, just middle of the road passing there. But you need somebody that can stretch the defense there and get you some big plays, especially when you got a guy like Josh who can, use his legs for receivers to get open. And I think Shakur is a perfect receiver for that. And then you don't have anybody else that I feel like that can do that on a consistent basis. Then without that, now you're kind of what you're saying. You're now relying on Hollins, who's been a special teams guy, kind of 4 or 5 receiver and some systems there, but has not consistently been asked upon to do that. Maybe with the Raiders a little bit he was, but outside of that, no, he's been really a guy that's been used in special teams role or just kind of situational downs.
It's funny too. I really liked Darnell Mooney in the free agent class. The Bills ended up going and getting Curtis Samuel, his familiarity with Joe Brady. Right. And I think that's been another thing that's really been gnawing at Bills fans. It's like Brady handpicked Samuel as a guy to add to this offense to really take it to the next level. And he has been invisible. I mean, the only thing that they've really even targeted him in for the most part has been these line of scrimmage screenplays or, lining him up in the backfield and trying to get in the ball that way. And listen, he can run if it's schemed up properly. I mean, I like those plays, but I think he could do more than that. But it's also why I liked Mooney. Now he got $39 million over 3 years compared to 24 over 3 for Samuel. So it was a much bigger investment. I don't think the Bills had the pockets for it, but you already see the field stretching ability that Mooney adds to that offense. And they have speed. They have some speed in that offense already. That to me is the missing element of this offense. And it's why I would have been more aggressive and traded up for Brian Thomas Jr. instead of taking Keon Coleman, because I think Keon Coleman, for as skilled as he is in those 50-50 situations, it's redundant with some of the other players that you have on this roster. And when Hollins and Coleman are on the field at the same time, if I'm the defense, I'm like, good. I feel safe. I feel like I can defend this in a way that I don't feel like they can attack behind me. I can keep everything in front of me, and it takes away options.
Yeah, you got 2 possession receivers instead of a receiver that can put you on skates as a defensive back. Man, you need that guy that can, make you feel uneasy on the field.
Is Amari Cooper that guy?
He's a great route runner. So yeah, I mean, he's not a burner, but his route running is incredible. I mean, I remember just seeing him against the Jets, and then he ended up scoring a touchdown on Sauce Gardner. So yeah, he's one of the best route runners to me in the league still at his age at 29, 30 years old. So that's why I think if you don't, obviously I know Devontae Adams is out there too. But if you don't get Adams, I think Cooper is a guy that can be still a number one wide receiver and also an incredible route runner. There's something that I think the Bills desperately need, and then he continued to find ways to get open. He just has bad quarterback play right now with Deshaun Watson being there. But if you get him with a Josh Allen, yeah, that's scary. That for the rest of the AFC for sure.
What about Deontay Johnson? It's been another name that's kind of been bouncing around. I don't know if Carolina is willing to give him up. I mean, maybe another loss or two, and they want to add a draft pick because I think he's in a
I think it's a good flyer. I think it's a good flyer. I mean, I think he's somebody that could be a 2-3 receiver in your offense, especially the Bills need they need help at the wide receiver position. I think he could be a consistent target. Obviously, not a number one guy, but I definitely think he could help the offense. He couldn't hurt it, especially the way what I saw against Houston, which I've seen a couple of Bills games there, but this year, but I just felt like the receiver just wasn't able to get open in those particular games against the Ravens and also against the Texans.
What's the latest on Hassan Reddick? And do you think that the Salah development here does anything for the Jets to maybe get something done there? Was Salah the one that was like, no, we're not giving in on this? Like, what's that situation? And then if you could pivot off that, what has the Jets defensive line been this year? I mean, I've noticed Will McDonald a couple of times when I've checked in on the Jets. Seems like he's kind of having a nice little season. But besides him and Quinnen Williams, where is the worrisome parts of this defensive line?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. Like, it's been hit or miss. Like, they had a great game against the Patriots. They ended up having 7 sacks in that one. Obviously, I want to put contents on that because the Patriots were out 2 of their starting offensive linemen in that game too, which really hurts. But they end up. It's been hit or miss there. Will McDonald's been really good there, but I think the fact of the matter is this: they've been inconsistent. They didn't record a single sack against the Broncos at all. And then against the Vikings, they had some success there with McDonald there, but they need a consistent pass rusher. I mean, especially with Jermaine Johnson out for the season with a torn Achilles, you don't have a lot of depth there. I mean, you're relying on Michael Clemens, who Deion Dawkins' best friend.
I forgot about that. Let's supercharge that this week.
Yeah, they get pressure on the quarterback, and that's just not his part of the game. He's more of a run-stopping, special teams type of guy there. But in terms of Hassan Reddick, it's nothing new to report. The Jets don't want to give in on a long-term deal, especially now when you're turning over a coach, because they don't know where they're going to be. Come January, we could talk about a rebuilding situation, and then you have to pay a guy that's just turned 30 years old. Extra 2-3 years left on his contract. Yeah, they don't want to do that. They wanted to just be this year, and then we'll see. But until he gets in the building, which he lives in New Jersey, which obviously what the Jets facility is, until he comes in the Jets, he gets integrated with the Jets and comes in the building. The Jets have said they're not going to do anything, and they continue to hold that stance. We'll see. He has to report by week 10, or his contract will toll over until next year. So we'll see how that works out there. But to this point, it's still nothing to report there.
What is Rodgers going on McAfee today?
Wednesday. He'll be on Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday at 12:10.
I was just thinking about that because I saw a McAfee tweet pop up on my phone, and I'm like, oh man, Antwan's gotta get out there because you're gonna have to be maybe writing off that bad boy.
Yeah, I already checked. Yeah, they already said it like the beginning of the show that Aaron, like it's crazy as it would be as any kind of coaching change. But yeah, tomorrow, because of the extra day with the Monday night game, they have tomorrow, so he's coming on in.
Ulrich, real quick before we get out of here. I think I saw somebody post something about, it might have been Rosenblatt from The Athletic, a story that he might have done about Ulrich potentially being a head coach at some point. And, maybe the guys in the locker room could, potentially really rally around him. What do you know about him? And then also, does this help the dynamic on the offense at all? I mean, I feel like it's just one guy out in Salah and then Ulrich in who can run the defense, but the offense is still going to have the same problems. Because I know a lot of people in Bills land are super worried about, like, you fire the coach and you get the 1 game bump off of the juice that maybe that creates a little bit of, like, changing of the tides. But part of this too is, like, they're coming back from London. They just kind of played in a real physical game. I don't know if there's enough juice here that'll be worth the squeeze.
Yeah, I dealt with a situation very similar to this when 10 years ago nearly when the Dolphins fired Joe Philbin and then they made Dan Campbell the head coach there. And then the Dolphins immediately won their next two games. They beat the Texans and they beat the Titans like pretty handily. And then they had that, because of the change in the guards and the players that, they just felt like they really wanted to play for Dan Campbell. And I could definitely see the Jets doing that because they love, Jeff Albrecht. The defensive players talk highly of him. Even some of the offensive players really tend to like Albrecht because, former player there. If you remember him as a player, he's very intense type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then his teammates really loved him. He helped groom Patrick Willis as a player with the 49ers. But as you said, like you can get that instant jolt there. It's kind of like when you drink coffee there in the morning, it kind of gives you a little bit of added boost there. But in the end, it's going to be up to you to try to, make sure you're in the, you're doing the right things to kind of, stay, afloat and alert to the rest of the day too. And it's kind of like, with the Jets too, even if, Albrecht gives you that juice at the beginning, the next couple of games there, they can't carry that momentum for, now you're asking them to do it for 12 games. That's going to be hard to do. So you're still going to have the same issues that you did prior to Salah being fired. You're still probably going to have the same issues unless you do some things that's going to change when Jeff takes over too. So yeah, it's going to be up to them to kind of do some things differently because obviously what they've been doing this year and even last year, it clearly is not working on the offensive end.
This one is going to be such a fun one to cover before we get out of here and before I let everybody know where they can find you and anything you got going this week. Get ready to score big with Topps Quarterback Blitz. It's going on right now for a few more days through October 12th. Shop over 25 of your fan favorite brands with your bonus plus and earn a quarterback for each one you buy. There's no limit to the savings you can rack up. Score touchdowns with these deals and keep the savings rolling. See participating brands over at topsmarkets.com. Antwan, thank you so much for the time. Let everybody know where they can find you, what you got coming this week. I'm sure it's going to be a busy week.
Well, I'm sure a lot of, Jeff Albrecht stories and players, their reaction to the fire and everything like that. But you can find me at Antwan Staley on all social media platforms. Also find my work at the New York Daily News at nydailynews.com. And yeah, I'm glad you had me on. We'll definitely have to do this again. And when I come to Buffalo, we got to go to that wing place that y'all always promoting.
Wing nuts.
Yeah.
Let's go. I'll actually try to work around that for a live show. So we'll do it up on a Saturday night. Get you some wings. It's going to be a great time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It should be a good time.
All right. Take care, Antwan. Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.